Are you feeling the party conference season exhaustion setting in yet, or are you still full of energy and enthusiasm?
I'm already coming down with the conference season cold. Sorry, guys. But I think the Lib Dems is a nice one to start with because it's a little bit more contained. It's good kind of to get your rhythm in before you go to Liverpool, which is going to be just, I think, hugely busy and manic for all of us.
Yeah, that's where the Labour conference is taking place. Yeah, give me a bit of insight into the atmosphere at Lib Dem conference this year. So
Lib Dem conferences, as I said, they're smaller, they're more contained. People tend to be happier and more cheerful because their party is doing quite well. Last year in Brighton, it was a real celebratory atmosphere, having just won 72 MPs. That had very much continued to this year. Yes, there are frustrations that, what is Ed Davey doing with his 72 MPs? Why haven't they made more of an impact? But in terms of the usual, I'm not sure about the leader stuff that you get at party conferences in general, there was none of that. There was a really kind of positive atmosphere, which is nice. Obviously, being by the seaside and it being sunny also gives it a sort of slightly more cheerful atmosphere.
Yeah.
But the weird thing was that this conference was all about the Lib Dems, and one of the main criticisms of British politics that the Lib Dems have is that they don't get the coverage that they feel they're entitled to because Reform get all the coverage and get way more attention. And yet they talked about Reform constantly. And I know we're going to come on and talk about Ed Davey's speech in a minute, which is a separate thing. But even before that, on the Monday, they dedicated a primetime slot on their main conference stage, not a fringe event, the main conference stage, to Reform Watch, where they had a whole load of Lib Dem councillors up on stage taking audience questions about how the Lib Dems could best challenge and bring the fight to Reform. That's pretty big to dedicate a main section of your conference specifically to how you deal with another party.
Why are they doing this, George? I mean, for the casual observer, they might assume that Reform isn't really a threat to Lib Dems because their seats represent such different demographics to the voters that Reform is targeting.
Yeah, so I think it's for two reasons. First of all, the Lib Dems are actually picking up quite a lot of support from former Labour voters at the moment. In fact, polling consistently shows they're the party that Labour is losing the most votes directly to. So Ed Davey is in part pitching at a centrist, maybe centre-left audience who perhaps feel that Keir Starmer hasn't been aggressive, vocal, fierce enough in his criticism of Reform over its increasingly hostile immigration policies. And he's looking for tactical votes for them in seats where the Lib Dems normally face the Conservatives. But Lib Dem strategists say, look, the electoral landscape is changing so quickly, and you're seeing the Conservatives wilt away so fast that it's possible Reform will be the Lib Dems' main opponent in some blue wall seats, perhaps even the majority at the next election. And so Ed Davey does need to hone his attack lines against Farage.
Interesting.
There's a sort of tactical point as well, which is that the Lib Dems have also just, I think, decided that because everyone is talking about Reform the whole time, if they can hone their message as the anti-Reform party, some of that attention will reflect back on them. And it was a really interesting comment from somebody who I think was on Kent County Council talking about how they got much more attention from the mainstream media as the party that was in opposition to Reform on Kent Council than they ever got as just the Lib Dems on Kent Council. As in, people will say, oh, Kent Council, the Reform Party wants to do X, Y, Z, and now we go to their opposition on the council, the Lib Dems. So they're framing their message in terms of we are not Reform in order to have some of that attention be cast back on them.
And beyond this, I mean, we'll come on to Ed Davey's speech, but beyond this critique of Reform, what do they actually stand for now? What are their main policies that distinguishes them from the Labour government?
So I think they see their main dividing lines as on Gaza. I mean, Ed Davey now calls the catastrophe there a genocide, boycotted the state banquets, calling for a more hostile policy towards the Netanyahu government. Health and social care, he said it's not good enough for Labour to have the Casey review dragging on for years. They're calling for more wealth taxes, and Europe. They want a customs union, and they say that's a path back to eventual membership. So I think you can see on those issues why they do appeal to some former Labour voters. But look, above all, Ed Davey's pitches and he told me when I interviewed him before the conference, he's obsessed with politically homeless Conservatives. So these are basically people who, you could see them as quite David Cameron-esque, fiscally conservative, so One Nation Tories.
Disappointed by Brexit.
Who above all, and it's interesting if you break it down, they're not all sort of urban progressives, but these are people who saw the Conservatives as the reliable party of government and were sort of outraged, offended above all by the incompetence of the Johnson and Truss governments. And the Lib Dems took 60 seats off the Conservatives. Of their 30 notional targets, I think all but 4 are held by the Tories. So if you're looking at how do the Lib Dems get from 72 MPs at the moment to over 100, it's taking seats off the Tories.
Right, okay. And when you got the copy of the speech, because journalists get the leader's speech before they speak so that they can start looking at what they're going to report on, what did you notice, first of all, Rachel?
So the speech was entirely framed around 2 people, Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. And what you had in the media centre in the Bournemouth conference hall, the media are in their own room. You've got all of the broadcasters, all the newsrooms there. Everyone gets emailed the speech at the same time. And every single journalist was just doing Control find, and looking for references to Farage's name, Trump's name. And there were 30 mentions of Farage's name and a couple of extra Nigels as well, depending on how you count that. 24 mentions of Trump. Kemi Badenoch got 1 direct mention. Keir Starmer didn't get any at all, although obviously Ed Davey did talk about the Labour government, but not about Starmer specifically. And you did get kind of a whole load of journalists going, oh, okay, like the entire part of this speech is about 2 figures, one of whom has 5 MPs, one of whom is not actually a UK politician.
And 10 mentions of Elon Musk as well, who's not only not a UK politician, but not a politician at all.
And it was really interesting to see all of these issues that the Lib Dems are quite strong on, sort of that George mentioned, closer ties with Europe and Gaza, but also, energy security, and the one that is very personal to Ed Davey himself, like health and social care and investing in cancer care and a caring society, talking about his disabled son, all of these issues that we know Ed Davey is very strong on, all of them framed in the context of this is what Trump is doing to America, this is what Farage wants to do to Britain, and we, the Lib Dems, can stop it. It was actually quite strange to see Ed Davey's idea of a caring society where we invest in the NHS and invest in social care framed in terms of look at Donald Trump's America. Like that bit was, it was like it was 2 different speeches, and he tried really hard to find a segue between them. Every single point that he made was in this context, and the refrain that he kept repeating, that's Trump's America, don't let it become Farage's Britain. I guess he will have known that he's only going to get like a 30-second soundbite, and he wanted that line to be in it.
Yeah, I suppose that's sort of quite tactical, isn't it? If one of your main gripes is that the media obsesses about Nigel Farage's party, then why not play them at their own game and insert them into your party conference speech to guarantee that coverage?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think they're trying to fish in quite a big pool here. So they talk about having quite a high ceiling, which is that the number of voters who say they're open to supporting the Lib Dems is higher than for other parties. And Trump, Musk, to a lesser extent Farage, are quite unifying figures in the British public in the sense that most people can agree they don't like them. Trump's incredibly unpopular. I think
he's unpopular even among reform voters.
Yeah, exactly. Musk probably as unpopular, maybe even more unpopular. And then Farage, about 60% of the public say they have an unfavourable opinion of him. So about a third of the electorate, like him or really like him. But if you're choosing those 3 men as your sort of punch bags, then you're putting yourself on quite strong political ground. I think it's casting himself as the anti-Trump, the anti-Farage, the anti-Musk. There are a lot of voters, perhaps not even natural Lib Dems, who will see that on the 6 o'clock news or hear the clip on the radio and go, yeah, I'm with you, actually. And that's it's a gateway to voting Lib Dem.
And there's another line that I think is related to that has been undercovered, which is the idea of patriotism. What is patriotism? So one of the questions that came up at the Reform Watch was, how do we reclaim patriotism from Reform? And the guy on stage went, investing in your communities, that's patriotic. Paying your taxes, Nigel, that's patriotic. You had Ed Davey turn up at conference with a marching band, lots of flag waving, they're playing Sweet Caroline. We've talked on the podcast before about that speech by Hugh Grant in Love Actually, where he's playing the Prime Minister who stands up to the slightly creepy US president and goes, we may be a small country, but we're a great country, a country of, see if I can do it, Shakespeare, Churchill, the Beatles, Harry Potter, David Beckham's left foot, David Beckham's right foot. It's the other way around. Anyway, and Ed Davey basically, close. Ed Davey basically took that on in his speech. He said, I actually love, but I actually love Britain. I'm proud of Britain. The Britain that I see, yes, it needs fixing, but it's not this broken dystopian hellscape that Reform like to play it as. And then he listed all the things that he loves about Britain, like the fact that Hollywood made Barbie and Mission Impossible here. And then he said, male voice choirs, Lake Windermere, cricket, village fates. Like, it was just this sort of an alternative vision of Britain where things are quite nice, and how maybe it could be patriotic to go, our country, it's kind of all right, really, rather than the version of patriotism, the sort of nationalistic, aggressive type that is, let's vandalise a roundabout with a St George's Cross flag.
Yeah, it's sort of the division between the litter pickers and the flag flyers, isn't it? Like, if you're going to go out and do something off your own back, then maybe pick up litter rather than putting flags up in places where they don't really need to be. Yeah,
and actually I didn't mention this in the piece that I wrote, but before Ed Davey spoke, there was a little video that we often have at conferences where it's just little clips of the Lib Dems doing things and being interviewed over the past year. And they had a clip of Kemi Badenoch saying what I think she believed at the time, being very critical about the Lib Dems, going, yeah, well, they're out in their communities. You'll see them. They're the kind of people who care about fixing the church roof. And they had that at their conference as we're the people who care about fixing the church roof.
Yeah, they are love bombing Middle England. And on the anti-Trump stuff, they're being very careful not to look Corbynite, not to look like the Stop the War coalition. They don't want to give off that more aggressive sort of activist vibe. They're leaving that to the Greens and your party. So that's why it's more of a Hugh Grant act than it is a Corbyn act.
Yeah. And just lastly, before we move on to the next topic, what about this critique of the British media giving more media attention than they think is due to Nigel Farage and Reform? I mean, the Lib Dems won 72 seats. They're the largest third party in British politics in over 100 years. Do you think that is reflected in the coverage, or do you think there is a point here?
Well, certainly the Lib Dems don't think that it's fair. And they point out that when they had 10 MPs, they didn't get any coverage at all. And they were told, like, you've only got 10 MPs. And now Reform have 5 MPs and are getting all of the coverage. I think there are a couple of things there. One is Nigel Farage and Reform are leading the polls, and that makes a big difference. The other is that on the key issue that seems to be sort of the hot topic of political debate, which is immigration, both illegal and legal, Reform are kind of owning the narrative there. They have a very clear message. The Lib Dems don't really want to talk about immigration. They do have some plans, but they want to talk about, controls on social media for teenagers in terms of mental health. And they want to talk about a fully funded social care plan. They're not owning that part of the conversation. So that's part of it as well. And also, like, Nigel Farage is very good at saying explosive, provocative things. And the Lib Dems so far haven't wanted to be provocative because, as George says, they want to be the kind of sensible, middle of the road party that doesn't really offend anyone. And I wonder if Ed Davey's speech this week, where he went a bit further than he has done in the past. And also there was one line which has got a lot of coverage where he sort of accused Reform of being in favour of relaxing gun control laws and opening the door to having American-style school shootings here in the UK. That, I think, is the closest that he's gone to being deliberately provocative to get headlines. So we'll have to see if that narrative works for them. But I can see why they feel that they are not being treated in a proportionate way, given historically how hard they've found it to get coverage and the amount that coverage Reform is getting. Yeah,
I mean, there are slivers of the populist playbook in this speech. I mean, the comment about gun laws, sort of fear-mongering about those, the impact of that, and then also accusing the BBC directly of copy and pasting Reform UK press releases in its online articles. I mean, attacking the state broadcaster as well is quite a sort of part of the populist.
Oh yeah, I mean, one Lib Dem called them a Nigel Farage newswire to me. Ed Davey said, "Look, I've lost count of them, but BBC employees who come up to me and say we'd like to sign your Balance the BBC petition, which is not sure would be very good for our careers." But look, I think. Reform, in a sense, did have it easy for a period because they were getting more coverage because they were leading the polls, still are leading the polls, and also because Farage is good for clicks and good for views. All journalists know that. But they weren't being scrutinised as an alternative government. Now, I think because they've basically led Labour since May, you are seeing more scrutiny. You know, he has been challenged more in BBC interviews recently. They were being attacked over a conference, you know, hosting anti-vaxxers and so on. So I actually think this is more of a testing period for reform. Similarly, I think on the indefinite leave to remain policy, that is something which might, you know, sit uneasily with a broad swathe of the population. So, you know, this will be it's Farage's sort of can't just keep doing his populist act. I think he is getting a bit more scrutiny now.